Has it been long enough? Are we allowed to talk about this movie now? So Ghostbusters tells a story of 4 women who create a ghost extermination business while paranormal activity rises in New York City. And now we are at the 2016 remake. This should be a fun conversation. Funny enough, this was one of the earliest things that I ever did as far as a reviewer. I wasn't on YouTube yet. I was doing my little podcast thing the summer of 2016, but me and my wife actually did do an audio review for that, and I think it's still on this channel if you want to go all the way back and see what very, very, very early Cody Leach stuff looks and sounds like. You could check that out. And I was very curious to check out this remake now that it has been quite a few years, now that the controversy has settled down, now that we are getting Ghostbusters Afterlife, which is going to include the original cast to some degree. I feel like the perspective has changed enough to where it's interesting to watch a movie like this that was so clouded in controversy when that controversy has kind of thinned. So for those that don't know the history of the Ghostbusters franchise, after the success of the first movie and the disappointment of the second movie, we'll just call it that, there was over 20-something years of trying to get a Ghostbusters 3 off the ground. There was so many times where Dan Aykroyd was swearing it was coming, saying that they had a script hammered out, saying that everybody wanted to do it, everybody was back together, and it would just never really come to fruition. Eventually, sometime around, I think 2009, they made a Ghostbusters video game, which essentially took what that script was going to be for that third film and put it into a video game, and it was actually a pretty good game too, and there's a remaster out for it here recently if you want to check it out. It's pretty fun. And then 5-6 years later, there was an announcement that there was going to be a Ghostbusters remake involving Kristen Wiig, involving Melissa McCarthy, and Paul Feig was going to be directing it. And pretty much universally, everybody was pissed off about it for a number of reasons. First of all, people tend to get angry about remakes no matter how well the intentions are, so it's pretty much got that going against it from the start. Then there was this big issue where everybody was very upset that the original cast weren't going to be a part of the storyline. They're in cameos, and we'll talk about those, but this was going to be a remake that was setting the slate clean, and it was going to be continuing its own timeline, and it was going to be disregarding the original films. It wasn't going to be some kind of a passing the torch movie, which is something that had been teased for quite a few years, that there was a Ghostbusters concept where the original cast was going to come back. You were going to have a new cast of the likes of like Seth Rogen and Paul Rudd, and those era of comedic actors were going to become the new era's Ghostbusters, and even that was very exciting for me and for a lot of people. But all that got washed away, and we were just going to get a gender-swapped remake that was going to completely wipe the timeline clean, have nothing to do with the original films. And a lot of people were pissed off about that. A lot of people had had their hopes so high for so long that we were eventually going to get the original cast back for a third and probably final movie before one of them passes away. And we never got that because eventually Harold Ramis did pass away, and that kind of felt like the final nail in the coffin for that possibility. And then right after he dies, they announced this remake. Within a couple of years, it felt icky. There was something about it that just felt like, we don't want this, guys. Like, people don't often want remakes, but this was one that pretty much universally the entire fan base said, no thanks, we don't want this. Don't do it.
My name is Erin Gilbert, Doctor of Particle Physics at...
And unfortunately, it did not help matters that during the press releases for this movie, during the actual box office time, even afterwards, even when they announced Ghostbusters Afterlife, the director Paul Feig, as well as some of the castmates, really did not say the best things to the fan base. I mean, there was a lot of insinuation that if you had any issues with this movie, then you must be a woman hater, or, you know, going down those typical lines. And that also clouds this entire thing and this political climate bullshit that was really starting to kick off around 2015, 2016, and is still going on today. So there was so much going on regarding the release of this film that just made it an absolute disaster. Even if this movie came out and it was an absolute brilliant remake, it would still be held in controversy because of all the bullshit surrounding it. And admittedly, when I saw it for the first time, that was the climate, that was kind of the narrative going into this movie, was that everybody involved with this movie doesn't give a fuck about the fans, and if you don't like this, then you're obviously a woman hater. And so I walked in, watched this, and gave it a fair shot, did not like it at all. and it actually angered me because there's quite a few things in this movie that is very hypocritical if that's the stance that you're going to take, and we'll get into that as well. So I have not seen this movie since the theatrical release, so that's about 5 years now that I have not watched this movie. I have not revisited it at all. I haven't even seen scenes of it. Like, my family doesn't watch it. I bought the Blu-ray for my wife because she loves Melissa McCarthy. I don't even think she's rewatched it since 2016. Popped it on today, and I gotta admit, it's very interesting to watch this movie with a different lens and watch it without all of that shit surrounding it and just take it on its own merit. So starting off with the positives for Ghostbusters 2016, I will say that I like the updated effects here. I like the updated third act. There's a lot of things that technology has allowed them to do with this Ghostbusters concept that is realized in a very fun way in this movie. There's a bunch of different weapons. There's a bunch of different styles of action comedy scenes. The third act is very exciting if you like Ghostbusters style action. There's much more going on here than any of the previous two movies, which is just a matter of the time. So they had a lot more that they could do now. And I think that the effects regarding the ghosts and all the apparitions and the monsters here, they do keep that classic Ghostbusters appeal of towing that line of being grounded enough to where it doesn't look ridiculous, but they still have this very cartoonish, lighthearted look to them that allows it to still be fun and not be some terrifying experience for maybe a kid that is very sheltered. So I enjoy all the effects work, all the ghost work, the return of Slimer, the cameo of the Stay Puft Marshmallow Man for a minute there, even the final boss kind of being the Ghostbusters logo in kaiju form. All of that I actually enjoy. I think that all of the women here that are taking the leads are very funny comedians. I think that all of them are very talented ladies. They do have a lot of good chemistry with each other, so it's enjoyable to watch them do movies like this where they're just kind of hanging out. It's almost like that Adam Sandler and Friends vibe where no matter what the hell they're doing, you still kind of enjoy it just because it seems like genuine friends hanging out. And you do believe that with these four castmates, that they do like each other off screen, that they do play very well off of each other comedically. And as replacements, if we're gonna do a gender swap, I think that those are the clear women to take the role, and they were casted very well for that. Chris Hemsworth is pretty funny here. I don't think this is his funniest movie. He's a lot more of a comedic presence in some other movies, even bad ones. Here, he's kind of the butt of a constantly playing out joke that I'm gonna get into, but some of the biggest laughs in the movie do come from him and come from his stupidity and come from his just likableness. You can't help but love Chris Hemsworth. It doesn't matter what he's playing. If he's playing Thor, if he's playing a moron, even when he's playing a murderous cult leader in Bad Times at the El Royale, you still love this guy just because he just has that star quality to him. And finally, I did like a couple of the added story elements here. This is somewhat going through beat by beat what the original film did to an extent, where you have these believers that come in that nobody really takes seriously, but they know that ghosts are real. They develop this technology. They prove that ghosts are real and that this technology is real, and all of a sudden they become saviors of the city when shit goes haywire in the third act. So very, very, very similar to the original film, and Ghostbusters 2 for that matter. But I do like the whole looming element of this villain, where he's kind of this standoffish, antisocial guy that is putting all these paranormal events in place to kind of go across these fey lines, which is a term I had never heard before, which I don't know if it was invented for this movie, but it was a cool little plot element. Him eventually committing suicide to become the lead ghost. Like, all of that was cool little added elements. If you're gonna remake a classic, I'm somebody that likes different things being put in, and though I would have appreciated a lot more being put in, what we did get here, I liked. Now moving on to the negatives, and unfortunately this movie's just not funny.
Let's go.
Let's go.
Oh, did you want to?
Sorry, I'll let you.
Next time.
For the reputation that Paul Feig had as a director and a writer, for the reputation that all four of these ladies had as being like the top female comedians at the time, it's a shame that this movie just feels kind of similar to Ghostbusters 2, to where it's a bit lifeless. It almost feels like they had no script. They just had the rights to the name, and they had this cast in mind for this female gender swap cast that was going to take over Ghostbusters for a new generation, and they just kind of let them ad-lib for the entire movie. And sometimes that really works. There's some comedies out there, like 40-Year-Old Virgin's a great example, to where the ad-libbing is some of the best parts of the movie, and it just shows you how comedic genius is at work sometimes behind the camera, and you don't really need a writer. Sometimes you need a writer. And this movie really needed some punch up with the script. It really needed some better jokes being written for these women, because so many times you can tell that they were just in the moment and saying something off at the top of their head that they thought was going to be funny, and the director kept it because he had confidence in them, and it just does not translate well. There is maybe 5-6 moments in this movie that genuinely will get a chuckle out of me, and none of them are ad-lib moments. They're all moments that are written into the script, like when Leslie Jones swan dives out into the crowd and then lands on her back and asks if that was a black thing or a woman thing. That kind of gets a chuckle out of me. Some of the Chris Hemsworth stuff gets a chuckle out of me, some of the physical comedy here, but all of the Melissa McCarthy riffing and Kristen Wiig riffing, and especially Kate McKinnon just kind of going off and being weird, none of that stuff lands. I also don't like and don't really understand the whole point of wiping all of the slate clean and making this a new timeline. I think this movie could have very easily have worked in the plot of the first two movies and utilized the original cast that were still living in a way that would actually feel like a passing the torch, and would have made this a little bit more acceptable for Ghostbusters fans, and it would have made more sense for their characters, certainly, because the cameos that all of the Ghostbusters, including Sigourney Weaver and Annie Potts, all of those cameos just feel wasted. And there's some of them that actually feel like a bit of a middle finger to the original. Like, you have Bill Murray, who you could argue is kind of the face of Ghostbusters. He's kind of the more popular character, and Venkman is now this non-believer doctor. He's the one that kind of takes on the Walter Peck role for 5 minutes, and then he gets thrown out of a window, and it's like, did you just throw Bill Murray out of a window in your fucking Ghostbusters remake? You got some balls. And speaking of balls, for the director and even some of the cast to take the stance that if you don't immediately accept this movie, or if you don't love this, or if you have any issue whatsoever with this film, that we're going to call some of your political affiliations into question. It's a little bit distasteful to have such an obvious and repeated knock on men throughout this movie. And again, I'm not somebody that gets offended by that. I could give a shit. If it's done funny, I can laugh with all the women in the theater at how bad they're making men look. I said the same thing with Black Christmas 2019. There's a version of that movie that's probably awesome. That was not it. This movie, every single male character that's worth talking about in this film is either an absolute moron, an absolute prick, or just an ignorant fucking typical mayor role where it's just like, there's a whole joke about him being the mayor of Jaws. Don't compare me to the mayor of Jaws. Now get out. And that gets a little bit old. Like, again, if they didn't make the political statements that they did, and they didn't try to shame all the fans for not accepting this and calling them out on things that are just absolutely ridiculous, this wouldn't even really be that big of a deal. But it comes across very hypocritical when you take that stance, and your movie is very obviously playing into the gender swap thing and making all of the men characters the absolute worst. All the way to the point to where they defeat the main bad guy, the big boss, the kaiju, by shooting him in the balls. That's very on the nose, or I guess on the balls. But that's just, again, that could be funny. Like, I get somebody putting that down and being like, this should get a laugh. This should make people uncomfortable to where they get that uncomfortable laugh. I get all of that, but it just doesn't work if you're gonna be a dick in the tabloids. At the end of the day, though, the problem with this movie is just nobody wanted it. Nobody wanted it. There are some people that are big fans of Melissa McCarthy and big fans of Kristen Wiig that didn't have any idea what the hell Ghostbusters was. They could have been just fine without this movie. But everybody that genuinely loved and cared about Ghostbusters, for the most part, I'm sure there's some people that like this movie, but the loud majority of us just had no interest in this, had no interest in a new timeline, had no interest in wiping everybody away from the first two movies, had no interest in any of the ideas that they presented here. And that's the main problem with the movie, is just no matter how good it was, is, or could have been, nobody wanted it. And sometimes Hollywood needs to do a little bit better job at reading the fan bases and reading the people that they're trying to sell their product to. Don't just shove it out there because it's a recognizable name and you recognize that nobody wants it that is in love with that name, because that just makes it sound like you're trying to get whatever money you can get out of it right now in 2016, and then we'll just move on from here. And that is just another reason why it just makes the movie feel icky. It makes it feel unappealing to fans, makes it feel like a bit of a slap in the face, and the legacy speaks for itself. We're not getting a sequel to this. We went back to the original timeline, and we're following through with that with Ghostbusters Afterlife. If you'd just listened to us fans, could have learned that lesson 8 or 9 years ago while Harold Ramis was still with us and given us a Ghostbusters movie with the whole cast and not reduce him to a bust cameo. But overall, guys, I will say I liked the movie more now without all of that climate kind of clouding the judgment of the movie. But it's still not a very good movie. It's an okay, passable remake that honestly had no business getting made, and I'm glad that we actually got Ghostbusters Afterlife. I'm crossing my fingers that it's going to be damn good because that's what I wanted, and that's what all the fans wanted, and I hope that all of our hopes are going to be realized here in a couple of days when we all see it. But overall, I would encourage everybody to watch this again if you only watched it in 2016, because I think some people might actually like it quite a bit that didn't give it a chance back then or watched it wanting to hate it, because I certainly might have belonged to that camp a little bit, I'll admit. But overall, okay movie. So if you're a Ghostbusters fanatic and you do not want to see any version of this movie that does not have the original cast, do not bother with this film. But if you're somebody that's open-minded or you want to see what a female-led Ghostbusters movie can do, I would say give it a chance, because there's actually a little bit more worthwhile here than the 2016 reviews would have led you to believe. So check this thing out online and stream it. So what do you guys think of the 2016 remake of Ghostbusters? Did you only watch this in 2016 with all the drama involved, or have you watched it since? What do you think about it? Do you love it? Do you hate it? Are you disappointed we're not getting a follow-up to this now that they're doing Ghostbusters Afterlife? Do you still have hope that eventually they'll cross the streams and bring them all together? Let me know your thoughts, guys, down below, and we will talk about it. Please like and share this video. Hit that subscribe button if you are a Ghostbusters fan. I've reviewed all 3 of the movies in the franchise over the past couple days, and we're going to be talking about Ghostbusters Afterlife on Friday and ranking all 4 of these movies on Saturday. So stick around for all of that. Thank you guys for watching as always, and remember, opinions are like assholes, but that doesn't mean that you have to be.